Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmidty, Swanee and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of three, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
Not too bad. Yourself?
You're a bit exhausted after Jonestown.
I am a bit exhausted after Jonestown.
And big one.
I'm grouse. I get really fired up on that stuff. It really makes me feel good about the world.
Oh, goodness me. We sound a little depleted, but that was a pretty big story. And yes, we're doing back-to-backs. So I don't know about you guys. I have nothing to report for the last 5-minute break. So I guess we should just introduce ourselves. I'm Schmidty. Oh, sorry,
I was going to say, I can confirm that if you shovel dinner into your mouth to try to get ready for the podcast, you will get indigestion.
Yes,
I agree
yes,
with
you
that.
will. So let's introduce ourselves. I'm Schmidty.
I'm Swanee.
And I'm Clarkey, and together we are
Trial
by
Reno.
Woohoo! And what are we drinking?
Come on, Swanee.
Oh, I cracked open another fine can of
Coke
Coke
Zero.
syrup.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Coke, no sugar.
We're polishing off the plus and minus Pinot Noir alcohol-free before we get stuck into the McQuiggan Zero.
Oh, wow. You guys have got
Shiraz.
a night of
Which-
nights. Oh, it's a bargain.
I'm a bit worried. Shiraz, yeah, so it was $12 and it's marked down to $8.40. And I thought, I'm not spending $30 on 2 bottles of non-alcoholic wine. That's ridiculous. So I bought the cheap one. And I reckon there's every chance it's cheap because it's nasty. But I'll let you know later on in the episode if you like.
We'll see how we go. Yes, very exciting. I'm on my now 3rd vodka cruiser, so mango raspberry. And
Ooh.
it's going down all right. So I'm going to tell you a story, and we sort of changed not that we really stick to a particular order anymore, because between Clarkey travelling the world and various other things, we used to do it quite religiously as to whose episode was up next, but we kind of mixed that up a while back. But because there are some parallels, sort of, between the story I've been researching and the Jonestown story that Swanee just did, thought it would be quite good just to follow directly on from Jonestown to this one. So,
I hope yours is equally uplifting.
yeah, we'll see. Yeah. But it really does have a great deal of themes about in terms of some of the stuff that we were just talking about in the last episode. So the last story I told was about Mother God, and we were all a bit surprised that a group of people could get so caught up and believe in a mishmash of religions and doctrine. I remember you, Swanee, being offended at me even using the word doctrine. And it made me think about why people can be so disenfranchised that they want to believe that there's a worldwide organization of people or bad aliens controlling the world. Well, if you know of times where your government, the people who have been entrusted with making policy and governing a country to provide for its people, has quite happily endorsed truly disgusting crimes against the people, it's little wonder why people think the worst of them. So, today I'm going to talk about a case of a government sanctioning crimes against its own people. My sources are, going back to your points, Clarkey, is this going to be uplifting? We'll see. My sources are the nypost.com, apnews.com, npr.org, an article by Ted Gupp in the washingtonpost.com, which was excellent, Wikipedia, cia.gov, spoiler alert there, history.
Here we go.
history.com, and the Smithsonian. Now, there are plenty of examples of what I'm about to talk about. Nazi Germany springs easily to mind, with experimentation on people that makes the most heinous of horror films look trite by comparison. I guess the key thing there was that the Nazis experimented on people that they had decided were lesser, so basically saw them like animals, to create a super race. I am in no way condoning the frankly sadistic and psychotic behaviour of these individuals, but reminding us that at the time these individuals had been able to look at other humans as subhuman, which made it easier for them to disassociate from the disgusting acts they were carrying out which is a bit like, I guess, experimenting on lab rats or animals, which is gross too. Anyway, what about when your government experiments on its own people and in a covert and non-consenting manner?
Oh, it happens all the time.
I was going to say, who would do that, I hear you ask? There are ethics committees and governance protocols that would never allow this sort of thing, I hear you scream. Back in the day, not so much. When you're facing the prospect of the USSR being able to control minds and communists being behind every door, you'll do whatever it takes to protect your country and your people, right? And what could be more useful than if you could control minds to create the ultimate assassin?
Ooh.
There have been numerous films and TV shows about
Alias,
this.
isn't it?
It's Alias. Person gets a phone call or is told a word or phrase which triggers this deep-seated programming, and they just stop what they're doing and go and kill someone and seem to have no memory of it.
Oh.
The Bourne identity is based on this idea. Jason Bourne has amnesia and is chased around by assassins trying to work out what is going on and his connection to the CIA. And then there's the Manchurian Candidate, another famous brainwashed assassin story. And it sounds fantastical, right?
But for this story...
Oh, wow.
Uh-oh.
You've got my attention.
Part and part. So let's go back in the timey-wimey machine to the 1950s.
Right.
World War II had ended, but international suspicion was at an all-time high. After all the spying during wartime, it seemed only fair that this should continue as a matter of national security. The CIA, or Central Intelligence Agency, was established in 1946, I guess as a way to keep all those wartime spies in employment, by Harry S. Truman, who signed the National Security Act into law. This was mostly driven by fears of the USSR at the end of World War II, which, given the leader of the USSR at the time was Stalin, who was known for the deaths of between 9 and 60 million people. The number is contested, but only in terms of how many millions of people were killed. It kind of makes sense. Now, we've all heard of Joseph Mengele.
I was going to say, did they run out of fingers when they're accounting? So they just went, oh, it's more than 6.
With 9 and 20,
More than
and
9.
then, but it's millions and millions, right?
Let's start again. 1, 2, 3.
Now, we've all heard of Joseph Mengele, one of those disgusting Nazis who did truly unspeakable things, and basically is an episode all to himself, if any of us could stomach it. Have you heard, though, of Sidney Gottlieb?
I reckon I have. I know the name.
That is surprising.
It might be my grandfather.
I don't think it
not
is.
really. No, I have heard the name. I don't know why, though.
Well, that's interesting because he worked at the CIA, which is usually really good at keeping secrets. But, maybe it will become clear as to who
Maybe
he was.
he came in the credits on some show or something.
Maybe you've heard of a Sidney Gottlieb. Or you
Yeah,
might
not
have heard this
B.
guy. You can tell me soon. So Sidney Gottlieb was born in the Bronx on August 3rd, 1918, to Hungarian Jewish immigrant parents Fanny and Louis Gottlieb. His older brother was a plant biologist. His name was David, who's also famous for completely different reasons, having discovered a series of antibiotics. Sidney, born with 2 clubbed feet and a severe stutter, so he was doing well from day one, graduated from James Monroe High School in 1936 and went on to study botany, organic chemistry, and principles of dairying. He notably kept goats and was really into goat's milk. Being a bit of a genius in the sciences, being a bit of a genius in sciences at university won him admission to the California Institute of Technology, where he got his doctorate in biochemistry in June 1943. He also met his wife, Margaret Moore, at uni, and they married. As he had 2 clubbed feet, which, by the way, had been operated on when he was younger to correct them, he wasn't able to join the military and serve in the war in a traditional sense, so he started to look for government work in Washington.
Can I ask the question? What is a club foot?
I think it's a malformed foot.
Is that all?
Yeah. Club shape, but both of his feet were like that. So he would have had difficulty walking, wouldn't have been into sports, would have had those
because if you've got
issues.
if you're, what's it called? Your instep, what's that bit called? If that's dropped, you can't be in the army, isn't it?
Flat-footed.
Yeah. If
I don't know about nowadays, but if your arch is dropped.
Yeah, that was a thing.
I feel like back in caveman days when they did actually go to war with clubs, having club feet would be advantageous. Poor bloke, he's born in the
We'd
wrong
have
time.
to be like a martial arts kind of kickboxer. Most of them
Yes, an
based on
upside down
your
whirling dervish.
Yes, yeah.
So now that you've asked the question, a clubfoot is a deformity in which an infant's foot is turned inward, often so severely that the bottom of the foot faces sideways or even upwards.
Oh.
So the foot itself would have been all right, but it's like, instead of being like turned down in a normal shape, it was like that or up. Yeah.
Gotta be hard to get
poor
around.
kid.
So like the Gruffalo.
Yeah.
That sounds awful. Sounds like the Gruffalo.
I believe you. Okay. Anyway, he and Margaret had 2 daughters, and they lived in a remote cabin in Virginia where they had no electricity or running water, but they lived pretty much off the land and in a rustic setting, and from all accounts, they loved it. Then he got a government job at the Department of Agriculture working on chemical structure of organic soils, and then he went to the Food and Drug Administration where he was working out ways to test for drugs in the human body, and he was a bit bored by that. In 1948, he got a gig at the National Research Council looking at hallucinogens, and then went to the University of Maryland looking into fungi. And most specifically, he did a lot of work around ergot. And do you know anything about ergot?
Mushrooms? I don't know. No.
Yeah, pretty much. Ergot is a fungus which refers to a group of fungi of the genus Claviceps. I don't know if you're saying that right.
They're crazy fungi.
They are fungi in that they can be hallucinogenic or a psychedelic
But they're more fun
drug.
than normal guys.
They are. They're way more fun. Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but I think ergot might be one of the theories as to why the Salem witch trials. It's a theory, but you know how everyone went a bit loop-de-loop in the Salem witch trials and told everyone that they were seeing all these things. Well, there was a suggestion that ergot was in the wheat or something and caused people to be a bit nuts. But it's a theory. We don't really know. Anyway, yeah, so he was looking at fungi at the University of Maryland, not the boring guys.
Fungus.
Fungi. However, his
Not fun guys though.
just one fungi. Anyway, his best known work was a gig at the CIA. He joined them in 1951, working for the then Deputy Director for Plans, you got to love plans, Alan Dulles. He had been recommended by Ira Baldwin, who had founded and run the biowarfare program at Fort Detrick years earlier, and as Sydney knew a lot about poisons, it seemed like a good idea for him to work at the CIA. In this post-war USA, people were pretty convinced that the communists were out to get them. There's another episode in that, at least in terms of the communist, or should I say, witch hunts conducted by Senator McCarthy. A bit like the Satanic Panic, the Red Scare, you've got to love these names, had everyone terrified, and I'm sure you're also aware that at the time people thought nuclear attack was imminent and they were building bomb shelters and prepping for the end of days.
It already sounds like last episode.
That's
Did
the
they
thing,
have
right?
white nights?
No, but it's
Don't you reckon that
me.
sounds like when people have white parties? So it's like white nights. It's like a
I
white night.
literally thought you were talking about like guards who wore white.
No.
And then, yeah, because there is that thing that goes around the world that's white night, and they light up all the buildings. And,
There is. I'm just trying to think if it's got a different name, like Blanc, something Blanc.
Or like the party kind of thing, the white parties. Yeah.
No, I was thinking the one they've done in Melbourne where
something
they
en
have
blanc, isn't it? Something like that. I don't been to something.
I thought it was dinner en blanc or something. Or
that's it.
Anyway,
that's it. I think. Yeah,
it's something en blanc. You're right.
That's
anyway.
not what they were doing at Jonestown. Dinner en blanc.
No, it's not. They were doing it at Jonestown. It's not what was going on in communist terrified at the time in the USA. The CIA were able to get plenty of funding, of course, at this time, and endorsement to work on programs to try and beat the Russians and the Chinese at their brainwashing game. Of course, neither the Russians or the Chinese were actually doing this at the time. It was pretty much a free-for-all when it came to the CIA and their wacky ideas. Now, I read something, and I haven't got the detail on it, but it came about because the Manchurian Candidate thing, there was someone who came out of South Korea or North Korea and had done something, and they didn't know what was going on. And at that point, it was sort of reported that he had probably been brainwashed by the Chinese, and that was where this idea of them having this skill set came from. Also, a little thing about Sidney Gottlieb is, as I was researching it, I kept coming back to the idea that, you know, the character of Q in James Bond?
Yeah.
And how he makes wacky little, pens that explode or shoot things, whatever. Sidney Gottlieb was a bit like that. And whilst I'm talking in most of the story with regards to chemistry, I believe he had all these little inventions, and the CIA at the same time were also doing that kind of inventing that sort of shit.
It says
So
like
they
Get
had
Smart,
this-
remember that?
It was. I
Mm,
make
it does
reference to
sound
Get
like
Smart
that.
later on, actually, because it's just
Mm.
like it, right? So they were creating these weird little gadgets.
Yep.
They had, at one point, they had, I think it was cats, and they were trying to use cats to, I think they injected like microphones in cats, and then they'd send them into the room because no one had noticed a cat, so you could listen in. But it didn't work because, cats don't do what you want them to, so they'd walk out of the room. But there was one cat, I think, that was quite successful at it, but he got hit by a car.
Oh,
They were just doing stuff that you would think that is the dumbest, something to do with pigeons, like using birds and animals to try and basically spy. All sorts of weird shit. But I didn't really go into the whole background of what the CEO was doing at the time because I'm kind of focusing on this component of some of the projects that they were working on. But I understand Gottlieb did invent a whole bunch of wacky shit at the same time. So it's a bit like Q. So Project Bluebird was underway when Sydney joined the CIA, so in that 1951 period. And the project basically was experimenting with special interrogation techniques using prisoners of war who were still interred in international black sites. These special techniques were using drugs to fuck people up so they would spill their guts. However,
They fuck you up.
They fuck you up bad. The project wasn't really sticking to the scientific method, so Alan Dulles put Sydney in charge of it to sort it out. He was made chief of the new chemical division of the technical services staff. I mean, they have got some catchy department names, don't you think?
Yeah, haven't they? Whoa.
Oh, the chemical division of the technical services staff. Can you imagine his business card? It would be like A4 paper.
And it'd be really normal sized apart from that line that would just be
Tiny little font because it's too long.
And a PTO.
When Sydney came along, they rebranded, because we like a good rebrand, Project Bluebird to Artichoke.
Not even Project Artichoke, just Artichoke?
It's Project Artichoke, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Alan Dulles was promoted to Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, which basically meant Sydney now, with the endorsement of Alan, could do whatever the bloody liked. He had the sanction of the boss man. So Sydney, with the support of Alan, decided to go no holds barred into the world of developing the means to master mind control, which included coming up with a perfect truth serum. Now, I think we're, to your point, Swanee, moving into the world of Get Smart, although it smacks more of chaos than control. What could we use to create this great truth serum or to successfully brainwash someone into becoming an Uber assassin?
Urga?
Drugs, of course.
Yeah,
Fun guys.
So they tried THC, which is the principal psychoactive compound of cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and mescaline, just to name a few.
Mescaline, is that like the lettuce? Isn't there like a mescaline lettuce mix? I feel like that's one of these kids is not like the other one and that one doesn't belong.
It's quite bitter.
That's endive.
Oh, bloody hell. Whitloff.
I don't know. What is mescaline?
The purple one's one I hate.
Yeah.
Isn't that beetroot?
one
No,
likes
like a
the purple
purple
one.
leaf is too bitter for my liking. I've got friends who can eat it, but often I don't mind rocket. The purple one they put with like
Frizzy
blue
Frizzy.
cheese.
Frizzy Frizzy.
Oh,
Do you remember that ad? I'm sure I've talked about this
Schmidty's
before.
gone off on a tangent again. Here we go.
I don't, but I
Tell
see
us.
where you're going.
It's a European
Let me welcome
ad,
you
the
to
kind of
Schmidty's
thing-
world.
The kind of thing that you would have had to work on at your previous employer in London.
Woolies.
You know how they dub it all over, but
Yeah.
it was one of those. But it was so weird. It was a bunch of like farmers and some looked like monks.
It does
and they
ring a
all
bell,
had-
actually.
They had lettuce, and it was like there was this
And
sort
I
of,
reckon I
little
can
war
picture
going
like it's
on.
the bag of
And
lettuce, like Florette or something was called, I reckon.
It was Florette, yes, and it had
Yeah.
like 4 different lettuces in it. And for some reason, to make this ad, they had these people, and it starts off with, I can't remember someone saying iceberg, or it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah, yeah.
iceberg, but whatever the lettuce was, cos or something. And then these guys run up and they go, Frizzy Frizzy,
I reckon I've
Frizzy
just
Frizzy.
found Florette and standoff or something.
Yeah. And then, it's a standoff. And then these monks, these scary monks come up over the edge of the thing and they go, rocket.
Found it. They're like having like a
Arugula, maybe
Oh, that-
arugula. I can't. Rosso.
radicchio. Well, that's the one. That's the purple one.
Radicchio.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Frizzy Frizzy, Frizzy Frizzy. Anyway, if you haven't seen that ad, you can look it up on YouTube. It's one of the
Florette
funniest ads
With the UK,
for a
that's
Florette lettuce mix you've ever seen. Yeah.
Well,
There it is. Rocket.
Oh, well remembered, Schmidty. That's really taking you back.
Anyway, I think mescaline is derived from like peyote. It's off a
Oh.
tree, I think. It's all of these things are off a tree or off a fungus, pretty
Yeah.
much. Let's face it, cannabis, cocaine, heroin, they're all plant-based. Anyway, the one I really enjoyed figuratively and literally was LSD. And LSD does come from our mate Ergot.
Oh, there you go.
Sydney had a crack at taking LSD himself. And after that, went hell for leather, testing it on people who agreed to be dosed and, of course, a bunch of people who didn't have a clue they were about to be drugged. LSD was pretty new at the time, having only been invented in 1938 by Albert Hofmann, and only found to be hallucinogenic in 1943 when Mr. Hofmann accidentally ingested some of it and had quite the trip. On a side note, I believe
What
Hofmann...
was it used for the first 5 years?
I can't remember. Can't remember what he was using it for. He was a chemist. He was just mucking around with
It was
things.
always done. It was always within the military, right? Though, is that correct?
We get to this.
Oh, all right.
Yes and no, but
Oh. I didn't know if it was like someone outside of that was working on it. I always thought.
oh no, he wasn't military. He was
Okay,
he
so
was
it's outside.
in Switzerland.
Okay.
He was he was just. I think he was just a chemist. Although you could be right, he might have been working for a war effort. It was 1938 and 1943, so it's possible. On a side note, I believe Mr. Hoffman took quite a lot of LSD in his time, and he lived to be 102.
Wow.
Complaining when talking at the age of 100 that it shouldn't be banned as it was a medicine for the soul.
Is he his own blue zone? You know, they have those
He's a microdose.
zones of the world where people live to 100.
Yeah.
I feel like he should be one where they just interview him and it's all about taking LSD, not
that's a
olive
medicine for the
oil and the
soul.
Mediterranean lifestyle or the Japanese.
Yeah. The Mediterranean diet, the LSD diet. That's right.
Yeah. You know,
Could be quite
you
slimming.
choose.
I don't know.
It'd be a bit wacky.
From what I've read about it, I do not recommend. Anyway, now, whilst it might be the case that it was medicine for the soul, when given to unsuspecting people administered by others who sought to master mind control, maybe it was medicine for the devil. So Sydney did quite a lot of experimentation with the drug, mostly on agents and prisoners, and eventually got some help from the Special Operations Division at Camp Detrick. The division had been set up under Ira Baldwin, as I said earlier. He's the same guy who recommended Sydney to the CIA. And it was a super selective and secretive group of chemists whose mission was to find military uses for toxic bacteria. Everyone loves a good bioweapon.
Oh.
So Sydney asked them for some help, and the CIA then got these chemists working on making bioweapons for the CIA. Sounds like a great idea. The thing about the CIA is it's supposed to be an international intelligence agency, finding out about all the
Overstepped the brief.
nasty things out there beyond home borders that are intending to attack or hurt American interests. In reality, the CIA has done some pretty dodgy shit, and not just what I'm talking about today, in the interests of protecting US interests. Arming and supporting the Mujahideen and jihadi warriors, for instance, but that's another story. Absolutely worth a read if you have the time or inclination. So, I guess working on secret ways to kill people with biohazards is just another way of protecting people. Unless, of course, those ways are turned on your own citizens. As anyone who engages in taking recreational drugs can tell you, strangely, cannabis, LSD, cocaine and heroin did not work out as great truth serums. They even got in the way sometimes.
Just a couple of.
Why didn't they just give him
I was
alcohol?
going to say, give him a couple of vodka cruises.
Yeah, Christmas lunch and a bit of
100%,
alcohol.
right? The whole time I'm writing this, I'm going, just get them peace and they'll tell you anything.
Stop complicating things.
When I was writing this, I was thinking about one of my favourite scenes in that Whoopi Goldberg film, Jumping Jack Flash, and she gets injected with a truth serum, which is probably the one that they actually do think works, and shows up at work as high as a kite, and the security card comes out, and she's absolutely off her face. And he's like, oh, I can't let you in, And she goes, look at me. This is the face of a woman on the edge. And this poor security guard just goes, I know, my wife has that face. He gets out of her way. Anyway, Sydney wasn't put off. Alan Dulles was now the director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Eisenhower, and that meant that he had carte blanche pretty much. Moving on from Project Artichoke, thank God, what a shit code name that was. He now had authority over all CIA research to nail mind control and the remit to test drugs on anyone, whether they knew about it or not. So they came up with a new project, got it approved, and it was called MKULTRA. And Swanee, this is the connection to the Jonestown story.
Yeah.
Because some of that conspiracy theory about the CIA was to suggest that there were people who were embedded in Jonestown who had been effectively programmed under MKUltra. So not that I'm going to go into any detail.
What do you think
about
MK
that,
Ultra sounds like? Is it a light beer? Is it a deodorant? What do you think it sounds like?
It's a soap powder.
I do like deodorant.
Deodorant.
I
I can
I reckon
imagine buying it.
deodorant
Like,
could
be
be a
fresh
I
good
can
all
one.
imagine
day.
buying it for a 14-year-old boy. There's your MK Ultra now. Then put some on your
Could it
skin.
be an energy drink?
It could, yeah. I mean, I'd
Schmidty,
probably
you're not
rather
the person
drink
to ask
MK
that.
Ultra. Yeah, I think I'd rather drink MK Ultra than Mother. I find Mother a bit weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the drink itself, but I find the brand name odd. Maybe they should rebrand it to MK Ultra. Yeah. Anyway, Alan approved the project on April the 13th, 1953. And he actually thought it was better than sliced bread. He talked about this project in a roundabout way when talking to alumni at Princeton, making out that the Soviets were already engaged in brain warfare, but really, and he called it brain warfare,
God.
but really it was Sydney and himself who were working out ways to scramble people's brains, break psyches, and just run amok in the name of national safety. MK Ultra's goals were the study of mind-altering substances that could do the following. And this actually came from papers that I got from the CIA website. I think this was a transcription of...
You went onto the CIA
Congressional-
website.
Yeah. I said to Tony when I finished, I said,
God.
when the feds
You're
show
in-
up,
I
I
was
said,
gonna
when
say-
the-
They're probably watching you now. Great. Finally, we've got someone watching or listening
This
to
is all
Trial by
public
Wine.
record.
Mm.
all public
Fucking
record, right?
CIA. Well done.
I said to
Schmidty.
Tony-
That's like stuck in listenership.
Lots of people seem to be in, I don't know, are they Virginia or where is
Yeah, they're
it?
at Langley in
Virginia, I was
Virginia.
gonna- yeah.
Barnacle.
No, we definitely Virginia. Oh,
Yeah,
God.
Langley. But I was laughing because I went
Hilarious.
upstairs. I said, when there's a knock at the door shortly, it's because the federal police have been alerted by the CIA that there's a spike in downtown Sunbury of someone looking into their business.
You're on
But
a
it's
watch
all-
list now.
It's all probably. I'll
From
probably
what you're
already
aware.
anyway.
You would already
Yeah.
been, yeah.
Yeah, I used to care about it and put myself on incognito mode. I don't bother anymore. Anyway, this came from, I'm pretty sure, like a transcript of some of the either some of the papers that did still exist and they were able to find about it because it was very secretive, or it was part of a congressional review into it, which happened afterwards. So anyway, this is what they were trying to achieve. They were trying to.
Just before you do, we
Mhm.
have had 3 listeners from Virginia.
Ah!
month, so
Stop it!
Well, we'll see if we get
That
more
a total
after
of
this.
4. That is alarming.
yeah, yeah, that's right. 75%.
And Clarky was the other 25%. All right. Substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. And by the way, just
Well,
use
that
alcohol.
shit's already gone mainstream, though.
Yeah, exactly
there's
right.
a lot of illogical thinking going on.
Just alcohol will do that. Substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. Materials
Mentation?
which, ability to think.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Materials which will prevent or counteract the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Doesn't cocaine do that?
Hydrotol?
I'm basing that question entirely on that film with Denzel Washington when he's on coke all the time and he's like an alcoholic. He crashes a plane or he saves the plane.
What movie's
He
that?
does something, and then there's an inquiry into it, and he's a bit of a train wreck. But I remember him like going out and he's maybe shagging a bird and drinking all night, and the next day he goes to court, and to sober up he does a line of coke.
All right.
That's the only reason I
Gosh.
think that cocaine has any effect on intoxication.
That could be why somebody that we know does cocaine on 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday.
It could be. There you go. Materials which will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol. So, things that you take with grog to make you even drunker.
Like alcohol.
Yeah, and I just have
More
more
alcohol.
alcohol. Yeah.
Shots, like Jaeger shots. Is that when they
Shots.
were invented? Jaeger bombs. Just whack a spirit in your glass of beer and that'll promote the effect of alcohol.
What's the acronym for?
Blood alcohol
For what?
content.
No, that's in your blood, but what in a drink?
Alcohol units.
ABV. Alcohol
ABV.
by volume.
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
Just
that.
have a higher
all
one of
over,
those
I didn't.
all over that shit.
How do you know that? What have you? Oh, I didn't know that.
because he needs to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he has to take a line of coke to sober up.
At 9 o'clock on a Monday morning.
That's right.
Can't
Okay.
afford it.
No, materials which will produce the signs and symptoms of recognised diseases in a reversible way so that they may be used for malingering.
Malingering?
Oh, what?
Materials which will produce the signs and symptoms of recognised diseases in a reversible way. So we make you look like you've got MS or Parkinson's or something, but we can get rid of that. So they may be used for malingering. So I'm a spy and I'm pretending to have an illness, but I don't really have the illness, but I don't have to act it because I'm on this drug that makes me look like I've got Parkinson's. So everyone in the
Right.
hospital, the spies for no apparent reason, thinks I'm malingering,
yes.
so it's okay, but then eventually I'll get better, is the way I'm interpreting that.
Jeepers.
Sounds like
Weird thing to
Limpy
be
Joe,
looking
or
for.
what
It's
was
a weird thing to be looking for,
Yeah.
isn't it? Limpy
Who was
Joe?
the
What?
bloke who dragged a leg in one of Swanee's stories? I'm sure it was on a Swanee's.
I don't remember someone
don't
called
remember
Limpy
Limpy
Joe
Joe.
dragging a leg.
Oh, it was
What?
something. No, it wasn't Limpy Joe, but it was something like that. And then he drove a motorcycle to the thing, and he was
To the
to the
thing.
warehouse, and he was captured on
CCTV.
CCTV
Yeah, that rings a
footage
bell.
dragging a leg.
That was the Wolfpack one, wasn't it? Where they were all like rooting,
I reckon it might have been.
rooting each other at Silver Lake or something.
Yeah.
The Wolfpack, that
Yeah,
does ring
yeah.
a bell,
Oh.
but I don't remember the dragging a leg bit. God, see, and
Yeah,
we-
it definitely
we
was, because
say
there was
we don't
Limpy Joe
remember
leaving
things.
the scene of one murder, and then he was seen at another or
On his
something.
motorcycle.
His name
well
wasn't
done.
Rusty, was it? Because
But I don't
there was
know.
someone
Well, I
called.
don't know. It could
There
have been.
was some stupid
There was
names
Limpy
in those
Joe
early
or
ones.
Limpy
something like that. Yeah. Not his real name. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. I
Yeah.
think.
Limpy Don. Sorry.
Materials which will render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness. Substances which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing. Materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use. So, you're shot up and you can't remember anything. Physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use.
Beyonce's new
So I'm
album.
telling you, it's like something out of Get Smart, right? Substances which produce physical disablement, such as paralysis of the legs, Limpy Joe, acute anemia, etc. Substances which will produce pure euphoria with no subsequent letdown. That's an interesting one.
Well, just forever euphoria.
It sounds like it. Swanee,
That'd
do you
get
remember
exhausting.
we used to have, what was it, Down Days Tuesday? I used to talk about it at Foxtel because there were certain individuals who I'm pretty sure were taking
Oh,
ecstasy
right.
every
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah.
And by Tuesday, they actually
Oh, yeah,
say
that would be
grumpy.
depressed. Yeah.
Substances which alter personality structure in such a way that the tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. I'm not quite sure whether that means physically, like you're just stumbling all over the place and someone's going to carry you around, or emotionally.
Sounds like coercive control.
Well, I think that's where we're headed. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individuals under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. So truth serum, basically.
Okay.
Truth
Sub-
stretching. Is there a truth stretching one?
Yeah,
so
I
you're
think
just
that's
so
called grog
confused
as well.
you can't lie. Yeah, that's called grog. Yeah.
This is called bullshit.
Substances which will lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. And I suspect I've worked with unwitting subjects of this in the past.
Yes. Haven't we all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Substances which promote weakness or distortion of the eyesight or hearing faculties, preferably without permanent effects. Preferably. So we're just blind and deafen people, but preferably we'd like it to, not be forever.
We couldn't come up with invisibility, so we'll just temporarily blind everyone. So that
Everyone
we
in the
can do
room
it.
can't see what's going on.
No answer a thing.
A knockout pill which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc.,
Jibs.
which will be safe to use, provide a maximum of amnesia, and be suitable for use by agent types on an ad hoc basis.
I don't want to sound skeptical, but
This
how
is
many
literally
of these?
what was written in the document that described MKUltra's purpose.
Yeah, no, I'm not discounting that. What I'm wondering is, how many of these did they actually bring to fruition? Like, what nonsense! It really is. It's of its time, isn't it? It's very
Yes
get
and
smart.
no. Yes and no.
Oh no, I don't want to
So-
hear about the no bit.
Sydney and his band of merry poisoners all went to work on various sub-projects of MKUltra, the deodorant. From what I can gather, there were 162 sub-projects where universities, researchers and physicians undertook research without knowing they were actually being paid or sponsored by the CIA. Effectively, what they did is they basically set up like shell companies. And so you would be contacted by company X to say, we're going to have this research project, and you would do it and you'd be funded for it. And you'd be like, I'm a university grad. This is brilliant. You know, I'm getting the funding for it and I'm going to do the research.
And all I've got to do is give my students LSD, which they're taking anyway.
Yeah. What's the harm in that? And I'll do it with the scientific method under controlled environments. And I have no idea that I'm actually operating for the CIA.
For the CIA.
Wow.
So Sydney was actually really into LSD. He thought, and apparently he took it quite a bit himself, he thought it had great application for covert use. So he bought all of it. Wow. $4.2 million worth of LSD from Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. And to put that into context, that's
With whose
$4.2 million
budget?
in today's money. With his
Right.
CIA's budget.
Okay, yeah, okay.
They had shit tons. They had
No, I
loads
just
of
wondered
money
if that
on
was his own personal diet of
no.
stash. Oh, okay, got it.
But to put it into context, 10 kilograms of LSD equates to 100 million doses. And the CIA wanted to stop other countries from getting their hands
Okay.
and maniacal chemists on it.
10 kilos, did you say? Was
I know, right?
Okay,
10
right.
kilos is 100 million doses of LSD.
I could do with losing 100
Jesus.
million doses of LSD at the moment.
So could I. I could do with losing $200 million of LSD at the moment. So, whilst keen on Butterching, we're here all night. Whilst keen on understanding the impact of drugs, he also dabbled in understanding the impacts of controversial psychiatric research, particularly around, and this is in inverted commas, techniques that would crush the human psyche to the point that it would admit anything. For that, he brought in...
Well, I think they got that bit right, didn't
Yeah.
they?
For that, he brought in physicians such as Donald Ewan Cameron and Harris Isbell. Maybe. Donald was a Scottish physician who had been hoping to sort out schizophrenia by brainwashing. And if erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche isn't brainwashing, then what is? Because that's what he wanted to do. But, this is 1950-something and anything.
Only to help people with schizophrenia.
Yeah. And psychology at the time was a pretty new field as well.
Right.
And so, they're also learning in the slightest of defence, right? So he lived in Albany, New York, and he went up to Montreal. So this is referred to in the documentation as the Canadian poisonings or the Canadian stuff. Went up to Montreal to carry out experiments at Allen Memorial Institute of McGill University. His experiments were funded by the CIA. But Cameron didn't know that at the time, right? So he's another one of these people who was operating for some shell company thinking he's
This
doing...
sounds kind of legitimate.
He kind of was. Oh, look, at the time he was... I didn't write it in here, but he ended up being like not a Nobel laureate or something, but he ended up being like a big head honcho in psychology. So he was quite respected. But he didn't just use LSD. He liked other paralytic drugs as well as electroconvulsive shock, otherwise known as shock therapy. And he liked to dose people with a shock therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. Whilst this shocked me, pun intended,
Well, I saw what you did.
what was more surprising, because I looked this up because I can't help myself when I get into one of these spirals, is that shock therapy is still used to treat severe depression, catatonia, and apparently it kind of works.
Yes, I knew that.
I didn't
They've
know
replaced
that.
some of that now with microdosing. So that's
Yeah,
the new thing,
okay.
like they were talking about hallucinogens, or that people who've had like major like post-traumatic stress and stuff, I just can't get past it. Apparently this is the latest thing is microdosing.
Well, that's interesting because some of this
Come full
research that was
circle.
being done in the 50s was actually kind of that. Like they were
Yes,
using LSD
absolutely.
to understand its effects on it, and maybe they weren't microdosing; they were overdosing. But
Yeah.
they were using similar drugs. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they use electrotherapy to help cure homosexuality too. Still.
Not still.
Yeah, 100%.
Really?
Where?
I don't know that I don't know that it's legal anymore, but I think that there's still
Oh God.
Where?
places where it happens.
In this country?
I reckon America.
Okay.
There'll be
I'm gonna Google it
there'll be
now.
a state somewhere.
Be careful, the CIA
Oh, yeah.
are listening.
This is when something comes up in our screen that tells us exactly which states because they're listening.
Paul, have you found any evidence that people are still using electroshock therapy to cure gay?
Is there a clinic that you
which
can
is
go
not
to?
a disease, by the way? It's not something that needs to be
So-
cured.
Advertised clinic.
The Mayo Clinic.
Um,
I'll cut that too.
Yeah.
I've just done a quick Google, and literally it's all over things. The first thing that popped up, which I was going to read out, is how can CBT help the LGBTIQ plus community? God, I hate that. Using CBT, you can catch yourself having unhelpful thoughts or engaging in negative self-talk, both of
I
which
really
can undermine
like
your
dick.
self-confidence.
I like it up my ass. It's negative
Well,
negative self-talk.
Yeah, like,
But I want to suck his cock.
yeah.
That's negative health.
Daylight.
God, I'm getting a bit loose. Sorry, that's my third mango chutney. I'm getting a bit
Name
loose.
and shut.
So I'm going back to Dr. Cameron. Sorry, Cameron Donald. Donald Ewan Cameron. I'm going back to him. So he had a
His
catch.
voice sounds very feminine.
He does, doesn't it?
It's we, Mrs. Murdoch.
William Cameron. Anyway, he had a catchword for brainwashing. He called it driving.
Oh.
And like driving into the brain, I'm guessing. And experiments included putting people into comas for weeks at a time while playing noises or repetitive statements on loop. It really does sound like some sort of horror film from the 70s.
Sounds like maths.
And the unwitting victims of his treatments were people who were seeking help for anxiety or postpartum depression. Many of his patients went on to have permanent effects from his treatment, or should I say torture, including incontinence, amnesia, becoming mute, forgetting their parents, and other shit you can't make up. So that was one sub-project, but what were the others? And I'm not going to go through 161 from here on out. Well, Sydney was really keen on administering LSD to anyone, really, but the best ones were mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and prostitutes, people who couldn't fight back, as one agency officer put it. In one case, they administered LSD to a mental patient in Kentucky for 174 days straight.
Oh.
In another case, they gave LSD to homeless children who were aged under 10. Of course, they also administered LSD to CIA employees, military staff, doctors. As Oprah would say, you get LSD, you get LSD, you get LSD. As I've said, some people didn't know they were being drugged and others were coerced. Military staff were threatened with court-martial should they mention it to anyone. It's very secret. The problem with all of this was that these experiments were in controlled environments for the main part, right? And that's the problem as far as Sydney was concerned. Sydney wanted to see what would happen to someone dosed who was out in the world, totally unsuspecting. He was sure it would work well if given to high-ranking officials to fuck with them when they were in important meetings or giving speeches. So he branched out a bit and started to experiment where LSD was given to people in normal settings without warning or consent. At first, everyone in technical services tried it. Could you imagine this workplace? A typical experiment involved two people in a room where they observed each other for hours and took notes. So one person would take it, have a trip, and then we'd take notes. Then they drugged someone who had no warning and they'd go off on a trip. This wasn't one or two experiments. It sounded like people were off their heads a lot of the time. One guy was drugged in his morning coffee and then became psychotic and ran across Washington, D.C., seeing a monster in every car that was passing him.
I hate all this stuff. I don't like drugs.
You can have amazing experiences or you can have horrific, scarring experiences.
Yeah.
And the thing, because I did a mental health training session and it covered drugs and other alcohol.
I recently drugged my employees.
No. I was doing a training session where it wasn't occupational violence this time. It was about mental health management. And we were doing drugs and other alcohol as a unit.
Yeah.
And the the thing about LSD and hallucinogens is that you can have flashbacks when you're no longer on it years down the track.
Wow.
And they can be really, really horrific. And that can be one of the things that causes people to have psychotic episodes or mental breaks. Anyway, that was another aside. So another here we go. You're going to enjoy this one. Another sub-project was Operation Midnight Climax. Here,
Ew.
the CIA funded secret brothels where
Oh.
they enlisted sex workers to dope their johns with LSD, and then CIA operatives in the next room would perv through cameras in the wall and peepholes on the sex workers and the johns having sex, and then the johns tripping off their heads. And the idea of that was to see whether or not they would spill their guts while they were having a good old time. Now, it's estimated that MKUltra costs around $87 million in today's money. Such a good use of taxpayer money, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
One operative who was involved in Operation Midnight Climax, George White, said, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?"
What?
That's what was like with it. Basically, this operative's a whole story on his own, right, George White? But his point was, I had carte blanche to do whatever I liked.
Wow.
This was, I could do literally whatever I liked. The idea of Midnight Climax was to see if the Johns, as I said, would be too embarrassed to report that they'd been drugged because they shouldn't have been there. 'Cause they were cheating on their wives usually. To see if they'd spill the beans, anything they weren't talking about, and it's really a bit ridiculous and a bit pervy and gross. Anyway, so far I've not given you actually anything to sentence, have I? So let me talk to you about Frank Olson. Frank was born in Wisconsin on July 17, 1910. And I'm grinning because I've accidentally typed 19210. But it's not. It's 1910. He went to the University of Wisconsin and excelled in the sciences, getting a Bachelor of Science and a PhD in bacteriology. He met Alice, a classmate, and they married and had 3 children. Frank joined the army and was a captain in the Chemical Corps. In 1942, he got a call from Ira Baldwin, remember him?
Yeah.
And Ira wanted him to come and work at Fort Detrick or Camp Detrick, which he did. Frank left the army in 1944 and continued his research into aerobiology. And in 1949, he was one of the scientists working for Operation Harness, which tested the impact of toxic clouds on animals.
Oh.
He worked on other projects which were pretty nasty, all in the name of science. And in 1949, he joined the Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick and became acting chief not long after. At some point, he started to work for the CIA, and in May 1952 was appointed to the committee for Project Artichoke, that old chestnut.
MKUltra.
So it was Bluebird, Artichoke, and then MKUltra.
Okay.
By 1953, Frank was over it and stepped down as chief, saying that the pressures of the job had aggravated his ulcers, which now we know, Frank, weren't the case because it's bacterial. It's not actually stress-related. And now he was fully working for the CIA. He started on at Fort Detrick, routinely watching the gassing, torture, and poisoning of animals, which pretty much fucked him up a bit. According to his son, Eric, he'd come to work in the morning and see piles of dead monkeys. That messes with you. He wasn't the right guy for that. Frank also witnessed multiple torture sessions in international CIA safe houses where people were literally interrogated to death in experimental methods combining drugs, hypnosis, and torture to attempt to master brainwashing techniques and memory erasing. So as much as I've made somewhat light about all the LSD usage, that was what was going on. Now I'm going to take this next section directly from Wikipedia, which was the page about Frank Olson. On February 23rd, 1953, the Chinese broadcast charges that 2 captured American pilots had claimed the US was conducting germ warfare against North Korea. Other captured Americans, such as Colonel Walker Bud Maharan, made similar statements. The United States government threatened to charge some POWs with treason for cooperating with their captors. After their release, the prisoners of war would publicly repudiate their confessions as having been extracted by torture. So effectively, they've said the US conducted germ warfare against North Korea, right? That's what they're claiming. And then they get out and they're told, you better redact that. On the 27th of July 1953, the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed, launching Operation Big Switch, the repatriation of Korean War POWs. 21 American POWs refused repatriation and defected, and the returning POWs were viewed as potential security risks. As a result, debriefings became hostile investigations in search of possible disloyalty. The day the armistice was signed, Frank, the bacteriologist, arrived in Northolt, UK. Frank's home movies from the trip indicate he travelled to London, Paris, Stockholm and Berlin. Upon his return, Frank's mood was noticeably changed, according to his family. According to co-worker Norman Coynoyer, Frank had witnessed interrogations in Europe and became convinced that the United States had used biological weapons during the Korean War. Journalist Gordon Thomas claims that Frank subsequently visited William Sargent, a British psychiatrist with high-level security clearances. According to Thomas, Sargent reported that Olsen had become a security threat and his access to military facilities should be limited. And that's significant. Olsen had spent a decade at Dietrich and he knew all the secrets of the Special Operations Division. He frequently travelled to Germany to witness interrogation sessions in multiple secret prisons. Evidence places Frank in Frankfurt, Berlin and Heidelberg, where the victims would occasionally die from trauma of the tactics used. Frank was one of the several SOD scientists who travelled to or through France in the summer of 1951 when the French village of Pont Saint-Esprit was poisoned by naturally occurring ergot, the fungus from which LSD was derived. If American forces did use biological weapons during the Korean War, there is circumstantial evidence but no concrete proof. Frank would know. The prospect that he might reveal what he had seen or done was a terrifying thought. However, back in wherever we were, Deep Creek, a semi-monthly retreat of the men closest to MKULTRA was scheduled at a cabin at Deep Creek Lake for Wednesday, November the 18th to Friday, November the 20th, 1953. A tentative participants list included 12 names, and old mate Sydney was on that list.
Mm.
On the Thursday night, Frank was drugged with LSD.
Can't trust Sydney.
And Frank had never taken LSD.
All right.
The city?
Yeah.
The Gottlieb.
After the seminar, he headed home to Maryland and his family immediately knew something was wrong. He wouldn't eat, he was distant, wouldn't talk about the trip and ignored his kids. 3 days later, on November the 23rd, Frank and his boss went back to work at Dietrich, neither of them feeling very well after the retreat. They were quite dusty. His boss, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Ruett, noted that Frank was agitated and asked and Frank asked Lieutenant Colonel Ruett if he should fire him or he should quit. He was in a pretty bad way, disoriented, feeling despondent about the work and showing signs of severe depression. The next day, Frank went to work, but basically within no time at all came back at home with his co-worker John Stubbs. He told his family, "They're afraid I might hurt you," and told his wife he was to undergo psychiatric treatment. So he, Ruett, and another CIA chemist, Robert Lashbrook, flew to New York where Frank met with a CIA doctor. On November the 28th at around 2 a.m. in the morning, Frank fell to his death and landed on the sidewalk in front of the hotel they'd been staying in. I believe he was in a 9th floor room. The night manager rushed to him and he tried to mumble something, but unfortunately the night manager couldn't understand him. Sadly, Frank died before the medics arrived. The night manager was quoted to have said years later, "In all my years in the hotel business, I've never encountered a case where someone got up in the middle of the night, ran across a room in his underwear, avoiding 2 beds, and dove through a closed window with the shade and curtains drawn." When police entered the hotel room, they found Robert Lashbrook sitting on the toilet in the room he shared with Frank. In those days, you had to put your phone calls through an operator, and the operator who took a phone call from that hotel room to somewhere else, placed to a Dr. Harold Abraham, the operator overheard the conversation. It was a short conversation, and they said it went, "Well, he's gone," to which the call's recipient replied, "Well, that's too bad." Now, the police deemed it a suicide. In 1975, so 22 years after Frank's death, the Rockefeller Commission uncovered some of the remaining documents about MKUltra, and the government admitted that Frank had been drugged without his knowledge and he had died 9 days later. The family announced they were going to sue, and very strangely, the government paid them $750,000, which is about $3.8 million in today's cash, to settle out of court, and they received an apology from President Ford and the CIA director, William Colby. That's in 1975. That's quite important. When Alice passed away, so Frank's wife,
Yeah.
Eric had his father's body exhumed so that they could be buried together. And I'm going to have to assume because he had been a military personnel, he'd been buried in a military grave.
Mm-hmm.
And because the wife wasn't, the son had decided to put them together. But at that time, he decided, since his dad was out of the grave, let's have him have a second autopsy performed. Or an autopsy. Interestingly, there were inconsistencies with the original autopsy. I know, shocking, yeah? Where in 1953, the pathologist had noted cuts and abrasions on the body, by 1994, there were none. However, there was a large hematoma on the left side of his head and a large injury on his chest. The pathologists in 1994 determined these were most likely received before the fall, and James Starrs, Professor of Law and Forensic Science at the George Washington University National Law Center, called the evidence rankly and starkly suggestive of homicide.
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun. Rankly, yeah.
Jeepers. I feel like the hotel man worked it out when he realised that the
ran through a
glass,
closed door
yeah,
with the window shut. Yeah. I will say for balance that there was a panel of forensic scientists who looked at that. Only one said that they didn't agree with findings, but all the others said, no, it looks like he's been killed. Whilst attempts to have a new investigation opened have failed, Eric Olson asserts that the forensic evidence of death is suggestive of a method used by the CIA found in the first manual of assassination. I wonder if you can get that on Kindle.
The first manual of assassination.
I know. Can I
How
get
many
it on?
are there? My
Honestly,
God.
there was another one I didn't give you, but there was some manual written that's like the sneaky, underhanded magic ways of the CIA or something, and it was again a training manual.
Assassination for dummies.
And it was literally something about magic. It was about sleight of hand, and it was a manual that a magician had written for the CIA.
Aww.
It was one of those wacky things to show agents how to do sleight of hand, basically.
Yeah.
And it had a funny name, like the secret crazy ways of which people, I can't remember what it was. It was a funny name. The first manual of assassination, and apparently it says, the most efficient accident in simple assassination is a fall of 75 feet or more onto a hard surface.
Yeah, that'd work.
So Eric and the other
Note
son.
to self, leave the door open. If you do use that method.
Leave the window open. I mean, honestly.
Don't shut it on the way out.
Pull the curtains across so it looks like it smashed the window.
Make
so it looks like
seem
someone.
possible.
I know, right? Pretty lazy. Anyway, but I don't know how he fell. I'm assuming they threw him off the roof or they threw him off something, or they opened the window, threw him out, closed the window, closed the drapes, and then went, oh, you worked out it was from here, did you? Don't know.
Mm.
At any rate, the sons, Eric and Nils, are still trying to get someone to open the case again. They tried, it's been closed. It has been postulated that Frank Olson's death was ordered by Alan Dulles and other high-ranking CIA officials, as he knew an awful lot about the nefarious goings-on at the CIA. Once they had drugged him at the retreat and found out what he knew, he was taken to New York and dispatched. All in all, given how incredibly close to a lot of covert operations he was, it's probably the most likely scenario. Unfortunately, as documents have been destroyed and the players of this Cold War-era drama have died, many of old age, we won't know for sure. MKULTRA morphed into a couple of other projects, which were called like MK Search and something else. The funding was reduced over time and it was abandoned, allegedly, in 1973. And the records of the project and sub-projects were destroyed on the order of then CIA Director Richard Helms. And the only reason that there's something like 20,000 pages that does still exist is because it was being stored in some other facility and no one realised it was there. Someone had taken some boxes to, shed C instead of shed E. And so they destroyed everything in shed E and there were still some things left over.
Thank God for people who can't file. That's brilliant.
As for Sydney, he left the CIA and became a bit of a hippie and everyone loved him. Like John Fight, remember him from Irene Garza's murder? He seemed to reinvent himself so magnificently that the man who had passed away, most likely from a heart attack at age 80 in 1999, was hailed as the most delightful of men. He raised goats, ate yogurt, and advocated peace and environmentalism. Of his time in the CIA, he considered himself to have been scapegoated. the evil poster boy for Cold War spy tactics gone mad, and was quite bitter about it. As far as he was concerned, he had only ever acted to defend his country in a time where the fear of communism was borderline hysterical and real. There's so much more to this that I couldn't cover it all in one go, but what a ride.
What a trip.
And as I said, maybe after that, and as I said, there's more. People who think that our governments conspire against us may have a point, or are they just on LSD? Thoughts? How is that?
Jesus.
So, and you see why I was saying that I've read lots of stuff.
Yeah.
That when you were talking about the conspiracy theory, well, it felt like when I was reading that, I can't remember her name now, but the woman's theory about what really happened.
Christine Miller.
No, Christine Miller
The
died.
one we said,
But someone who never even went there,
Yeah.
never went to Jonestown itself, but was in the temple. She had a theory that the CIA had come and gunned people down. They staged it to look like a suicide thing, that Jones had never ordered these people's death, all that sort of stuff. That was what she was saying.
I understand that more now.
But actually, in the context of the time, so that was 1978, was it?
1978.
1973, they allegedly disbanded MKULTRA. And they didn't really, because they changed its name and they had other projects that came off. And what they've been doing for 20 years was not only just trying to work out, how to brainwash people and create good assassins or whatever, but it was how to interrogate people. What was the most effective way to interrogate people to get what you needed to know out of them, right? So then if you think about that, you think about this fear of communism that has allowed them to spend, in today's money, $87 million to do all of that up until 1973. 1977 comes around and your mate Leo Ryan is now aware of this congressional review that shows that they've done all these terrible things, in contravention, by the way, of the Nuremberg Articles, which had only been created in 1945, right after World War II. So only 8 years after that, they are immediately contravening human rights in this behaviour. So you've got a congressman who says, or a senator who says, geez, the CIA's a bit dodgy, aren't they? Because they're now much more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
They also found out that they had no oversight, right? There was no governance or oversight to any of the things they were doing. It was literally, deep throat kind of shit. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is it? Yeah.
Well, I thought I did, but then I just don't see how that applies to the story.
Tell me,
Deep throat. It's like a Watergate type, all of that. This whole era of people doing really suspicious shit, right?
Yeah.
And lying to the public and doing all these sorts of things. You can kind of understand why in 1978 it is possible that the CIA did have some involvement in Jonestown.
Yeah.
You actually can. I'm not saying they did.
No.
But I can see why people might draw that conclusion because of at the time, when you think of it, the historical context of the whole thing.
Yes.
So
I see
don't
your
come
point.
for me, CIA. I'm not saying that you did it. I'm saying it's possible to understand how people would think that.
I think they're listening and someone's saying, what's she saying now? She's saying,
oh, she's
you might
just
have
saying
done
what every
Jones
other
some harm,
podcaster says.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Virginia listeners have gone up to 4.
Those were the days, my friends.
I don't get their bizarre accent.
That's what, Alan Dulles and Sydney were saying. Those were the days, my friends. We thought they'd never end. And we were young and bought all the LSD.
We thought they'd last forever and a day.
Well, only if we could find a substance that allowed us to have an endless euphoria, as per one of the goals. So what do you think of that? Isn't it wild?
Jeepers.
Crazy.
It's wild, isn't it? And I'm relatively confident that even if the CIA didn't push him out of a 9th-story window, they're certainly responsible for his death, in as much that they gave him LSD without his consent.
Yeah.
And then took him off. I mean, it's all a bit dubious. So I think I wish Eric all the luck in terms of trying to get that looked at again and get a proper and appropriate ruling for his father's death.
It's
Terrifying.
wow, and overwhelming. Like
2 overwhelming stories.
I don't know. I just don't know where to look and who to point at, and
It's disgusting.
just makes me want to go and live in the country somewhere away from all of that shit. Oh, hang on a minute. I already do.
Maybe they just all have to have a Russian roulette of ergot infected foods versus normal foods, and they're just sort of in trial by wine world, and they don't know
I
if
think
they're
that-
going to trip or they don't know if they're going to have a good day.
I think we should invite them to lunch at Debbie Patterson's house. For anyone who
Well,
doesn't know
yeah,
her,
we can't
she's a
do that yet
mushroom
because
lady.
we don't
Oh,
know
right.
yet. She can have one of Debbie Patterson's matches. Well, let's just
Well, we
say
do know that going to lunch at Debbie Patterson's house doesn't end well. It's whether or not it's deliberate that's up for
True.
conjecture, and who knows?
Well, maybe it's a Russian roulette between magic mushrooms and death cap mushrooms. Oh.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, it's like a wedding, an alternating plate.
Death cap? Magic.
Beef,
Chicken.
exactly. Right. Wellington, Confungi.
Oh, my Lord.
Oh.
Swanee's not going to say anything because it's all about the CIA.
I don't know what. I actually don't know what to say. I'm a bit sort of baffled. You know, I'm not. That's not the right word. It's funny because so many things have happened in the last, I'd say 10 years. Probably not actually 10 years. Probably less than that. But there are things that I used to see in movies and things that I used to read about in books that I truly believed were fabricated and
Oh, no,
that's
it's
like
this
a-
podcast.
and my-
It's totally
no,
the
no.
scales from
My-
our eyes.
I have to say, when people started talking about COVID, I thought, whatever, I felt laughing at it. And then just seeing those photos
Pandemic.
of the world grind to a halt, where you'd see, like the Venice canals, whatever else, cities that totally deserted. That an airport had shut down. I was like, that'll never happen. An airport would never shut down. And there've been so many different situations that have happened. That's just a great example of Vimor, where I think that can't be true. And then it is true. And I think there's another one, Hella. And my mind is just scrambled. I just don't know. More often than not, it would appear that people were doing things, particularly in that post-World Wars era, when there were a lot of advancements in lots of different fields and people, they were getting the brightest and the best scientists and doing things. I don't necessarily think that people oftentimes were doing it with ill intent. Sometimes they were, because I've seen enough movies, but I don't know who to blame. I don't know who runs it. Who? It's such a big thing. It's like the invisible part of it.
Yeah, look, I tend to think that Sydney probably was scapegoated a bit by the CIA. So he really did see himself and a lot of other people who were in that program, they thought they were patriots. They thought they were, trying to be the last line of defense, if you like, against this Red Scare.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, you also had the Cuban Missile Crisis come up in the middle of this as well. I mean, this was serious shit. They weren't. I mean, I make jokes about it being like chaos and get smart,
but it truly
James
was.
Bond,
They were
but it
all
really
waiting for a
was.
big bomb to go off, and that to be the end of it. And everyone was a spy. Even like on a sort of a local level, it's not just similar to the Jim Jones thing. It's like if you were considered to be, communist leaning or whatever else, you were like.
Well, I made reference to McCarthy and the witch hunts in Hollywood, where they just went around, accusing people of being communists. And there were actually two people, and they were like a married couple, and they were, they might have had communist leanings. They were executed in America as traitors.
Yes.
It's extraordinary what was going on at the time. And I think in our modern lens, it's hard for us to look back and recognise how frightening that was. Remember, the atom bomb basically ended World War II, and no one had seen anything like that until 1945.
No.
We're not far off seeing the devastation of a nuclear weapon. And then we've got this idea that everyone else has got nuclear weapons and they're all beating us, the race to the bomb, and they're all going to beat us and they're going to blow us up. I mean, that was that tension. I remember growing up even in the 80s.
Oh,
worrying
totally.
about whether or not Russia was going to press the big red
things
button
from my
and kill
childhood
us.
that are like my standout memories. That I wanted to be a solid gold dancer when I grew up. And I was terrified.
Tick.
Yeah. And I was
opposed to a hot
that
gossip one.
we were going to die in a nuclear war, and there was a nuclear explosion. There was a movie called Threads that I wasn't even allowed to watch, but everyone talked about it. I've watched the preview of that recently, the trailer. Fucking hell, it's horrendous. And that I'd get AIDS. So that was my childhood. All my teenage years was that we're going to be wiped out by a nuclear bomb, and I'd get AIDS. So
Wow.
there you go. That was my
I
whole
remember having
life.
a fear about the nuclear thing and Mum saying to me, the people in power, they have children too. You know, I suppose she was just trying to say something that made
I
me
think
feel
she was
better. And it
quoting
did
a Sting song.
she probably was.
Yeah,
It did
yeah.
make me feel better.
Isn't that-
It worked,
you know,
right?
even the Russians have children too. Isn't that like a Sting? Is it?
I hope the Russians
Their
love
children
their
too.
children
Is that
too.
Sting or no? It's something else.
Yeah, it is. No, it is. It is. I heard that on the radio the other day. I'm just listening to it, going, "My God,
Because
this is just
the point, right?
crazy." But it's so
East and West, the
accurate.
Berlin Wall didn't fall till way later. So,
Yeah.
and Hungary was still a communist country at this point. Like, it was actually, it had
Was it
legs,
really?
right?
Oh,
like, it
totally.
seems ridiculous,
Of
but
course
it had
it was.
legs.
It was absolutely
Whether or
the
not,
climate. and we should
using
go-
LSD was a stupid thing. The issue, I think, with this is not necessarily experimenting with LSD. It's doing it to people who are not consented to be part of those programs. Some people did.
Yeah.
But some didn't. Prisoners, vulnerable people, they did a lot of stuff that was in contravention of human rights. But to your point, Swanee, if you're in, it comes back to if your intention is good, is it okay? Does the end
No.
justify the
I
means?
think that where it falls apart is when they're doing it to people that do not know what they're involved in, and they're doing it to the people in society who are most vulnerable. I think that's off.
Yeah. And look, Frank
There's
Olsen
also,
wasn't a saint. He was involved in programs. One of them, I'm
Who
not
was
sure
that,
what
sorry?
the outcome it was. Frank Olsen.
Uh-huh.
There was one program, I can't remember what it was called, where they, I said he was working on aerosols.
Yeah.
They did something where they actually exposed 800.
MKUltra.
No, aerosols.
Does anyone know what Michelob Ultra is?
No, MKUltra, the deodorant. No, they sprayed something somewhere, and 800,000 people were affected by that.
Whoops.
So it's like, hey, in the 50s, they liked setting off nuclear bombs and testing in the Nevada desert, and people used to go watch it and thought it was a great night out, before they understood that they'd all die from radiation poisoning or cancers later on. This is the sort of
Bloody
stuff
hell.
that was going on right, left and centre. Oh, and also Gottlieb or Olsen, one of the other two, they were also involved with the U-2 plane? A really famous...
Does reconnaissance? No.
Reconnaissance, yeah. The U plane.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I feel like an idiot when I say shit like that. U-2 spy plane. It was U-2.
Yeah.
The U-2 spy plane. So they were actually involved. This is the level of how high up they were and how exposed they were to the truly secret shit that was going on at the time. So you can understand if Alan Dulles says he's got to be knocked off because he knows all of this stuff.
It just reminds me of that quote, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph in the world is that good men do nothing.
Mm.
And I think, people like Sidney Gottlieb, who, yes, might have thought he's doing the right thing. When you start doing that to people, thinking that you're on the side of good, it's not okay. And there's obviously this whole group that the way people in the CIA at that time would have viewed the world and what they thought was right and wrong would be so far skewed from the general punter. Like, it just wouldn't pass the pub test. But obviously at the time you get, enough people telling you, yeah, this is for the good of the country.
Absolutely.
You do shit.
Yeah, I don't want to be sentenced to the CIA if you don't mind. But yeah, I think like looking at it through the lens of that era would be totally different than where we're at today and what they thought they were. That was a real threat. So it was not they weren't creating and looking for ways that would give the US and its allies advantage over
competitive advantage.
enemy. Yet they would have been doing everything.
And also the CIA of today, acknowledges that this happened, isn't proud of it. We're not talking about the same thing anymore.
No.
I've got to tell you, though, I don't understand why, but the bottom left-hand corner of my computer had a little message came up that said USA ban in 4 hours. And I didn't understand what it meant. And then I just said the CIA of today is not a problem, and it's just changed to something else.
Oh, my God, I'm telling you. We're being monitored.
Probably
Virginia listenership gone up to 6.
Probably we are. Like, as I said, this is a historical context. This is in that. And I'm not going to sentence the CIA. I'm not even going to sentence Sidney Gottlieb. I honestly think that he did. And he, I think he just did what he thought was right. I get what you're saying, Clarky, but, it's like Tony Blair, right? everyone shat on Tony Blair because the UK went to war in, what was it, Carla? We were there.
2000 and
something, because we had this threat of weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
And there'd been 9/11, and there'd been
2003, I think.
So the bombing of London hadn't happened. That was 2007.
Yeah, that was
wasn't
after
it?
that. Yeah.
But he on the intelligence that he'd got from, I'm going to assume, MI6, that with these weapons of mass destruction were within an hour and a half of bombing London, right? He said, all right, we'll invade or we'll do whatever we have to do. People shat all over him and hated him for that. But frankly, living in the country with the fear of dying from that, as we were at the time, I was all right with it. And I think you can't take away from, if you don't live that experience, I don't think you can actually judge it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. But at the same time, I do feel for the Olsons, and I hope that Eric gets Eric and Nils,
I know who to remember, I know.
alive, and I'm hoping they get some kind of, even if they just know, like, it doesn't really matter at this point in time if they know that he was murdered by an agent.
Yeah.
It matters to them.
Yeah,
is
it
what I
does.
mean.
Yeah, there's the truth.
I think just knowing the truth would be a good
Oh,
thing.
100%. You'd love it if they would just come out and be honest. Yeah.
But
Then you're left
they
with
are a
knowing, does
secret
anyone know the
organisation.
truth anymore? Do you know what I mean? That's the thing, right? When time has passed,
That's
and
what
if all the
happens.
documents are
Yep.
destroyed, then it becomes it's truly a mystery.
Swanee, but is it the truth or is it your truth?
Oh, gosh.
No,
Fuck, I hate that expression.
God.
Anyway, so thank you for joining me on what I felt was a pretty wild ride
Yes,
down
absolutely.
the road of LSD, hallucinogens, and the CIA. I really enjoyed researching that one. So thanks for joining me. And as we
Thank you,
say,
the CIA for
Thank
listening
you, the
in.
CIA.
Thank you
doff my hat
Yeah.
to you, sirs. You're doing an excellent job protecting
to
America.
the people in Langley who are listening.
I would
Thanks
also
to those
like
three
to.
people who have been listening to us. Yeah.
I'd also like to call out our friends at ASIO. You two also do an excellent
Thank you. You
job.
boosted our
Yeah.
listenership. Well done.
Mwah, you do a wonderful job, ASIO, protecting Australia. And I was looking up Australian intelligence, and there's some other group. Do you know who they are? And their website says, what have they been doing? And it's like, we've been protecting Australia for 150 years or something like that. I was like, okay, never even heard of you. Good job, though, fellas, whoever you are.
I'm surprised.
So
keep
to
up
all
the
the
good work.
spooks out there, good job. And as I say every week, miss you already.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.